Hello, it's that time of week again for Wedding Planning Wednesdays. Thank you for being here. I am going on a little bit earlier today just because I have some work meetings that I have to go to and I can't miss, and I didn't want to push it to another day. Wedding Planning Thursdays or Fridays just doesn't have the same ring as Wedding Planning Wednesdays. I have also been considering potentially moving it to the evening so that, at least for West Coast folks, maybe it's better if it's after work time, because I realized that a lot of couples really probably spend their time after work planning and researching and things like that, because I would really love for people to join me live at some point or another. So I think maybe I will consider that. If you think that you would join me live every now and then if I went later in the day, please let me know in the comments if you're catching the replay of this especially. But if it's your first time here, my name is Jane Yu. I am the co-founder and co-owner of UNS Events. I own the business with my husband, John, who runs the DJ side of things. I run the planning side of things. And I help engaged couples plan and design their wedding from beginning to end. John and I really love throwing a good party. So if that's your vibe, then we might be the company for you. And I provide step-by-step guidance along the planning journey, but also really try to hone in on making intentional decisions and help you make personalized choices that are going to be the best for you and your wedding. Because at the end of the day, it is your wedding day and we want you to be happy. If you do like this video, please hit that like button for me. And if you want more content, you can always hit subscribe. And as always, you can download my free wedding planning guide and checklist to get started. It's linked in the description below. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments, or if there's any topics that you'd like me to discuss in the future, please drop it below as well, and I would be glad to take a look. So today's or this week's enhancement, I always like to talk about something that's enhancing my life. And today it's not quite a tangible physical thing, but I did want to talk about Bonita Bowl, as in the Super Bowl halftime performance by Bad Bunny. And I don't know if you watched it. I hope you did. And if you haven't, you must go watch it. I don't know if it's streaming. I'm sure it's on YouTube or Peacock. You might be able to find it. You can also listen to the performance on Spotify. They uploaded the entire performance. It's like 13 minutes long. You can listen to it, and I have definitely been listening to it. But, music is a big part of our lives. John and I met at a music festival. John is a DJ, so obviously music is very important to us. And music adds such a great it adds so much to the energy and vibe of an event. And I wanted to bring this up specifically because obviously there was a lot of chatter around the selection of Bad Bunny for the halftime show. And, I didn't really pay attention to a lot of it, but I watched it and it really gave me a burst of energy for this week. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I realized that it really kind of gave me hope, like the message of love and peace and community, that we are all people. It really resonated with me, and I feel like with a lot of other people. And if that was you too, I think it was something that was just really needed in this specific time, really. And, there's a lot of BS comments about whatever about the show and whatnot, but it didn't bother me. It doesn't bother me because for me, I was just really focusing on what that performance was all about. And I do want to read a little bit more into it because I know there were a lot of cultural references, obviously, like paying homage to just history of a community. And I don't know, it was awesome. It was really awesome. It was art in its finest form, I feel like. And people were just going wild, like everywhere. And it really, really made me happy. So I hope that's how you felt about it too. If you haven't seen it, go catch it for sure. And it also, I've been thinking about starting a community of wedding professionals in LA, focusing on women of color. I really want it to be a diverse and inclusive group. I've gone to a lot of events, or not a lot, but I've definitely gone to my share of events in LA, and I just haven't found like the community that I'm looking for. So it gave me a push to just put the call out on social and see who's interested, and we'll see what comes of it. But enough about that. We're gonna move on to the wedding planning part. And today I am going to talk about the guest list, which seems like a simple task, but it can maybe feel harder than you think as you get started. And I just wanted to give a little bit of my perspective, things you can think about as you get started. And it really had me thinking about our wedding. I mean, we got married almost 8 years ago at this point, and I still think back to it as I'm creating these videos because I obviously have a professional perspective from the wedding planner's point of view, but I've also been a bride myself, and John and I obviously went through the process together. So I think it's important to give a little bit of the personal, a little bit of the professional. And thinking back to our wedding, if we were to get married now, this was almost 8 years ago. So if we were to get married right now, there are probably a bunch of people from that time in our lives that we probably wouldn't invite today. And there might be people back then that we didn't know or we might not have invited, but maybe would invite today. And so something to think about also, I was thinking about just in terms of like adult life, the seasons you go through, like who you have relationships and friendships with in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, and so forth, really kind of makes a difference on the guest list. And it also depends on who they are. There's different phases of life. And back then, there were childhood friends that I invited who I hadn't really kept in touch with, but that remained a big impact in my life. And I would still invite them today. Even though I don't really keep in touch with them, that's how much of a connection or deep connection that I feel to them. And maybe at that time, there was someone I was really good friends with during that period, but we kind of lost touch. And it's not anyone's fault, or nothing happened usually, but there's just seasons, as I mentioned. And so I think that is okay to think about, and you don't want to overthink too much about what the guest list is. So there are certain things that you can definitely consider that'll help you make certain decisions about who you should invite, who you want to invite, and all of that. So diving into just kind of like a little bit more of the logistical parts of it. First off, I always encourage everyone to use an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet because it's easily sortable. You can sort by first name and last name. And then if you need to do addresses and things like that for mail merge, for sending out invites or save the dates, it's just better that way. Mail merge, though, is annoying sometimes, or not annoying, but I like to have a column for first and last name, like 2 different columns. But when you're doing mail merge, you need just 1 column for first and last name. The reason I like doing it with first name and last name is for when I do the seating chart. I like to do the seating chart with last name alphabetically. And so it's just so much easier to sort that way. I think a lot of but I know that a lot of different sites have address planners or guest list planners. So if you're using Minted, for instance, to send out invites, you can look at their template for mailing addresses. You can collect addresses through Paperless Post, Postable, Google Form, Typeform. There's just so many different options. So before choosing one, honestly, you can't go wrong with Google Form because that will just translate into anything. But let's say you're going to use Minted for your website and for your save the dates and invites, then you might as well just use their address tracker or guest list organizer. If you are planning to use one of those websites, I would definitely recommend using their organizer. A lot of times you can just pop the CSV file or your Google Sheet or whatever Excel you have into there, as long as it's the same format. But if you already know you're going to use one of them, then you might as well just keep everything in one place. That's just my suggestion. So the first thing you want to think about is budget. I mean, budget has so many other layers that go into it, but for the budget, guest list, the amount of people you have really impacts what you're going to spend, right? As I've mentioned before, food and beverage is about 50%, 50 to 60%. I'm sorry, food and beverage, like all the big things that you need for the wedding. So venue, food and beverage, furniture, plates, all of those things, that should be no more than 50 to 60% of your desired budget, right? And this budget should not be pulled out of thin air. It should be based on some research of what you want your wedding to be or where you want your wedding to be. And so after doing that research, obviously there's a big range. You'll kind of see where you're landing and then figure it out from there. The reason I suggest doing that is because Google is not going to give you, or ChatGPT, they are not going to give you the correct budget for what you're looking for. So I really, really urge you to do your own research and not just rely on Google or what people tell you or whatever. Because if you ask your friends, they may have gotten married like years ago and prices may have changed and things like that. So you want to do a little bit of your own research to come to that number. Now, based on that budget number, you are going to kind of figure out how many guests you think will work for the type of wedding you want. And so then you start making your list, right? And I would do like a brain dump for sure, but even before doing that, I would talk to your family and also your partner. This is something that I say for literally every single step of the planning process, I feel like. Talk to them, especially if your family or parents or sponsors or anyone are contributing to the wedding. There may be expectations. And so you may want to talk to them. And then with your partner, you want to talk to each other to figure out what kind of vibe you want. Like, do you want it to be intimate? Do you want it to be like a huge party? Do you want it to be destination and intimate? Do you have a big family? Like, these are things that you all have to discuss to come to a reasonable guest count number. And so I think with parents, it's a little bit, you have to talk to them about it, because if you have a big family, sometimes when people have big families, literally, 100 or more people sometimes are family, or I've done weddings where most people are extended family, which is kind of nuts, but really, really cool too. I love those weddings because they're super fun and meaningful. So getting a sense of all of that is important. And then when you start making your list, you can just kind of brain dump. And I'm sure you might have heard of like the B list or tiered lists, meaning, there are certain people who are priority and then certain people who you might invite if there's room. But I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the tiered list, because if you weren't going to invite them in the first place, why add just because it didn't hit the number of guests that you were thinking? I guess if you have a minimum at the venue, you might want to fill it in just so you're not losing out, obviously, on that guest in terms of paying for it already. So if you already have a seat. But that's actually another point, is you want to ask caterers and venues what their minimum guest count is and minimum spend. So those are kind of two different things. Minimum guest count is going to be usually based on a minimum spend, because a lot of places have different tiered packages. So you can spend more per person and have less guests, but still hit the minimum. Or you can have more guests with the lower tier package, so you can hit the minimum. And you always want to check with them what their attrition rate is. Meaning, if I sign a contract for 100 guests, am I beholden to 100? A lot of them have like a 10% attrition rate, meaning if you book 100 people, you can only go down to 90. Some people, you can just finalize the guest count whenever. Some venues and caterers have a minimum F&B spend that you have to meet. Everyone's very different, so you definitely want to check. Budget-wise, I would recommend getting a proposal for the max number of guests you think you'll have. So if you're inviting 100 people, I would see what the cost is for 100 people. But to be honest, when you're inviting 100, it could be anywhere from like 65 to 90 people, I would assume, just depending on a lot of factors. So I would definitely check, hey, what's the lowest amount, or what's the minimum number of guests I need to have, or how much do I need to spend? Because you don't want to be caught later when you're, paying. You could have paid for 65 people, but because you signed a contract for 100, you have to pay for 90, or do all these upgrades because you're not hitting the F&B spend that you contracted for. I hope that was not too convoluted. I can definitely shed more light on that, but I also break it down a little bit in my budget videos, which I'll link below, that I've created before. So going back to the tiered part, I don't know how I feel about it, but I guess it makes sense sometimes, because let's say you want to keep it at around 100 and you're at like 95, right? And maybe you have a group of friends from like, past coworkers or something like that. But you don't, it feels weird to only invite a few of them because there was like a group of 8 of you that you always used to hang out with. And you're not as close anymore, but it would be really fun if they came, especially if there was room. In that sense, maybe you can keep them at bay for sure. But I would definitely be careful, because you don't want to like keep pulling for no reason. And so I think it's good to have, or just think about and consider if you want, or if that works for you, but it's not 100% necessary. Also, for plus ones, you want to be clear when inviting your guests. I don't know what standard practice is for plus ones, to be honest, but here's my point of view. If you do want to stick to a certain guest count, I feel like plus ones are like if someone is married or engaged or in a very serious relationship, I think, and you know that, and you know the significant other, you should definitely give a +1. Sometimes when there's a single guest or a friend who doesn't know anyone else really at the wedding, we gave those people a +1s. For certain people who we were friends with, but they were dating someone kind of new, and we didn't really know them, we didn't give them a +1. I don't know if anyone asked us for a +1, but I guess that can be a case by case. If someone does ask, that's up to you if you want to include a guest for them or not. I don't like just including it, or I don't like the feeling of having to include it just out of obligation. But if you feel like it will elevate or enhance that person's experience at your wedding, I think giving a +1 is a good idea. And then kids, I know this is sometimes a hotly debated topic, but adults-only weddings are, popular as well. And I think that if that's what you want, then that's what you should have. And for people who have kids who are invited to weddings and it's an adult-only wedding, it's totally up to you if you want to go or not. But I've seen people get mad about being invited to an adults-only wedding and they have kids. And I'm like, well, it's not your wedding day and it's your choice if you want to attend or not. So if you don't want to attend because it's a adults only wedding, then that is totally on you. When I got married, I had a bunch of friends who had babies that year. And so, I didn't have kids, or I don't have kids, so I didn't know like exactly what the parameters would be. But one of my friends did ask me if she could bring her child who was under a year old because she was still breastfeeding. And I hadn't even thought about that. And I'm sure if I had said no, she would have figured something out. But I said yes. And then I thought about all my other friends who had infant or like newborn babies. And I extended the offer to them as well. I was like, hey, I understand like you're breastfeeding. If you want to bring your child, or if they're too young to leave at home or with the sitter or whatever, you're welcome to bring them. And actually nobody else brought their babies, and that was their choice. Again, this is not something that you have to do. If you're okay with people saying no because of the adults only part, then that's totally your choice. And I think you should stand by that choice. If anyone does get offended or upset about it, that's not your problem to take care of. And if they couldn't have an open and honest conversation with you about it, then why do you need to cater or pander to that person? I don't believe in that. And then questions I think you can ask if you feel like you have a tight list and you're like on the fence about some people, maybe ask, is this a forever friend or friend of the moment? Maybe it's like a newer friend, but you're like really close at that time and you want them to be there because it'd be super fun. But you're not sure if you have room. Then I would just think about like, hey, in 5-10 years, do I think I'll still be in contact with this person? Do I still think I'll be close to that person? And that may sway your decision one way or the other. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really what feels right to you and your partner and your families. That's kind of like the theme, I guess, of wedding planning in my perspective. So whatever feels good to you, I think you should do. And sometimes you may have to make some obligatory decisions, and that's okay. And to this day, even though there are people that I don't talk to anymore or that I've lost touch with, I don't regret any of the people that I did invite. I think we did invite people pretty intentionally that we really wanted there at that moment in time. And so it worked out for us, and it was really, really a great event and party. And so again, I don't think you'll have any regrets as long as you kind of think through these things and talk to your partner and families about it. That's really the best you can do, right? And so again, communication is everything, and just talking about it, putting things out in the open, figuring out what you want and like, that's really the name of the game as you're planning your wedding. So I hope that was helpful. I know dealing with people, like that's one of the number one things, or that is probably the number one thing that's considered the most difficult sometimes when wedding planning. So I hope that this was helpful as you're starting your journey. And as always, please drop any questions that you have in the comments. And you can always download my guide, my wedding planning guide and checklist, linked below. And next week, I am going to talk about my take on wedding planning marketplaces. Those are platforms like The Knot, Wedding Wire, Zola, etc. I'm not going to do like a deep dive into like what they offer or anything like that, but just about my experience being on those sites, like working with those sites from the perspective of a vendor and planner, as well as even when I was planning events for clients and also for my own wedding. So thank you so much for being here. I am always so grateful to everyone who gets through to the end of the video. And I